Hello, welcome to my talk on university governance structures, a first EU-China comparative study within LEAD. My purpose is to summarize what kind of results can be drawn hitherto and discuss what next. University governance structures is one of the research lines within LEAD2, and there are many reasons for that. First, international university networks get an increasing importance, and several university functions are shared within that network. So reshaping the university governance structure becomes a necessity. And to do so, we first must understand the governance of the university partners. In particular, to achieve better and deeper cooperation and collaboration between EU and Chinese universities, it is critical to understand and to acknowledge the differences. We must learn from best practices because both in China and in EU, there is a tendency towards enhanced autonomy and operational capabilities. We are more and more responsible with respect to self-governance, of the quality assurance, of our implications in societal innovation, international cooperation, structural organization within the ecosystem of a modern university. We observe also a convergence at the macro level. In Europe, for example, in the context of the Bologna framework, and in China, we found a generic university architecture that is much more homogeneous than in Europe. At the micro level, thanks to our increased autonomy, the university governance becomes more and more diverse and is dependent on the university vision and on its local ecosystem. So, convergence at the macro level and divergence at the micro level. The high-level convergence is also triggered by an increased comparability and benchmarking around a few key performance indicators and international processes. For example, induced by the rankings. What are the research questions? Well, the first question is, what are the main internal governance structures of 10 selected comprehensive public European and Chinese universities? What are the similarities and differences between them? To investigate this, we slightly modified an existing comparative framework published by Gornitska, meant for global characterization nationwide. Indeed, many national level studies exist, but it is very difficult to assimilate these findings with an individual case. It is difficult to recognize one's own university governance characteristics with those listed for the country. Therefore, we wanted to adopt a new bottom-up viewpoint for explaining and understanding the impacts of the reforms of higher education in Europe and in China through studying cases. This is my talk's outline. First, I will give a broad overview of findings hitherto, not exhaustive, but simply to illustrate the kind of conclusions we can draw from our study, which leads to, I would call it, a descriptive narrative of university governance of 10 cases, allowing bottom-up comparison. After having done this, it is perfectly normal that you heave a sigh and say, so what? Because, as we will see, organograms, organic statutes, and communication flows, together with a questionnaire, are not sufficient to really understand the governance. I will illustrate what my proposal would be for the continuation of the study, namely an analysis of the main university processes. And I hope this will open a discussion on what next. Now back to the paper, the publication. First, some global observations before diving into our research setup. Governance principles in EU are much more heterogeneous than in China. Nevertheless, each Chinese university presents an organogram that looks quite different. For the European universities, we observed that the organogram does not necessarily reflect the governance structure as is in practice. This is probably due to delegations and implicit power redistribution. Here is our analysis framework. As I said, we borrowed it from a paper by Jornitska, who used it for global nationwide analysis studies. The analysis items are the internal democratic nature of the governance structure, the external involvement in the central university governance structure, the level of centralization of decision-making authority in the university, and the level of individual responsibility. We refined the first analysis item in 3 parts. We analyzed them in more detail, namely the highest authority, the leadership roles at different levels, and the organizational functional structure. Let us focus a little bit more on the analysis items one by one. The internal democratic nature of the governance structure. For the European universities, in the 5 cases, internal democracy is reflected by the fact that leaders at all levels are often elected internally. Staff members and students participate in the whole governance process. For the Chinese universities, the Shuji, and I hope I pronounce it well, and the president, director are mostly appointed by higher level departments. Internal democracy is embodied in the election of leaders and participants in the university governance structures at lower levels, in the school, and the democratic management bodies such as the faculty, the staff congress, the student congress. Now, the external involvement in the central university governance structure. For the Chinese universities, externals are found primarily in separate meetings, like the Alumni Association, the Foundation for the donors, for example, and sometimes the university board. But globally speaking, one can say that they are not mainstream and act as advisors. The level of external participation is relatively low. We observed 3 pillars: political power, administrative power, and academic power, and they have to be balanced. The university is led by the party committee to closely integrate the needs of society and the Socialist Republic with Chinese characteristics in terms of university operation and development. For the European universities, we observe a real integrated external participation in boards and councils, both at central university and at faculty level. They are present in all cases. Participation of external members is high. They may have key responsibilities, but do not necessarily have decisive power in practice. And that is true for 4 out of our 5 cases. In one case, they have the majority in the board. Externals are often absent in the Senate type bodies, which are more academic. Let us look now at the third analysis item, the level of centralization of decision-making authority in the university. Decision-making authority is more centralized in Chinese universities than in European ones. In China, university governance is divided into 2 parallel pillars, a political and an administrative one. In the university governance, we can also identify 4 parts: the University Party Committee, the Staff Congress and Student Congress, the units responsible for administrative affairs, and then the Academic Committee responsible for academic affairs. The Party Committee is responsible for party affairs and major decisions, and the President is responsible for administration, academic affairs, and daily operations. The system is called the President Responsibility System under the leadership of the University Party Committee, and the other governance bodies come in support of this system. Looking at the level of centralization of decision-making authority in the university for European universities, we see very heterogeneous governance organograms. Nevertheless, 2 types of models are identifiable: the unitary model and the dual model. The unitary model is either based on a board type model, which indicates strategic institutional dominance, or a Senate type model, which indicates academic dominance. The second model is the pure dual model. It is based on both Senate and board type bodies with a power division of equal importance. In practice, however, it is a hybrid mixture of both models that is dominant, namely a dual asymmetric model, whereby the academic senate is assisting the board or benefits from power delegation, which might be so far-reaching that sometimes the effective power balance is inverted. This causes, in my opinion, that the perception of the stakeholders might be very different from the statutes. The unitary governance models are dominant and basically coinciding with the countrywide models. But in practice, the stakeholders perceive something different. They perceive a real hybrid model. The fourth analysis item, the level of individual responsibility. Well, individual responsibility at the top level is more concentrated in Chinese universities than in European universities, while in most EU universities, a well-specified individual responsibility is defined at all levels. The highest authority of European universities is the board, the senate, and the rector, whereby the board is generally responsible for institutional decisions and the senate for academic affairs. In all cases, there is always a high-level entity with strong external representation. The rector, as the head of the university, does not have the same power in all EU universities. Our study does not unambiguously discriminate how the power of the rector is mitigated in practice by the board and the senate. This is different in China. The highest authority of Chinese universities is the University Party Committee or the Standing Committee of the UEP, the UPC, because in practice, Suji also convenes and presides over the Standing Committee, which is responsible for the regular work of the UPC. So far, some conclusions. More details in the paper. What I wanted to do is to illustrate the type of conclusions we can draw from our studies. Let me now browse rather quickly through some slides made by Doris, the main author of the paper, so that you get a flavor of the descriptive content for each university case. For each university, we have the organogram as shown here, and a descriptive which is summarized here in the slides. The 4 analysis items. Here is another case with another organogram and some descriptives of the 4 main analysis items. So what? Well, I think the merit of the paper is that we actually made the exercise on bottom-up analysis of university governance structures and come with a structured description of governance structure for each case as a result. The shortcomings are, can we derive best practices from it? My answer is unfortunately no. Did we gain understanding of how the universities function? Very partially, I think. One of the main limitations is the discrepancy between, on the one hand, perception of the governance and the governance in practice, and on the other hand, the formal descriptions. The main question now is what next? If we want to reach the goals for which we started the research line, in my opinion, we should search for the complement to governance structure. Should we look at rankings? Well, they describe primarily output performance, and it will be difficult to correlate them with university governance structure. Financial models? Well, interesting, but complex and strongly context dependent. Vision and roadmaps? Well, for sure, correlations with governance structure will exist, but causality will be difficult to extract. Processes. How is the university governance structure involved in the main processes of the university? Feasible, I think, and for me, with the highest probability to lead to best practices, better understanding, and inspiration for change, which was the initial objective of our study. Let me illustrate this with a few examples. If we go for analyzing processes, we should also involve, in my opinion, vision and roadmap, because some processes will directly have to support both of them. Strategy and identity are expressed by roadmap and vision. And as examples of processes that have to support this, we can mention, of course, the image and communication processes, the human resources, through their policy and the recruitment policy, one can emphasize certain priorities. Infrastructure is also an interesting process because it is supportive of the identity of the university, and finances can express focus through the allocation model. Another example of a global university process is the quality systems, and primarily the institutional quality processes. Policy and organization, robustness, procedures, the sustainability of the processes, and the continuous improvement. Important is the cartography, the layout of the processes, which implies involvement of persons and governance structures at all levels. That is where the organogram intervenes. The degree of autonomy supported by the governance, where internal quality processes and external meta-audits intervene. The community building processes, for example, the culture, research cluster animation, community services. As said previously, the university's ecosystem becomes an important new player in the university governance system. Sustainable development goals and societal responsibility processes, support and design of new educational and research methods and paradigms, student involvement. Another type of processes are the openings and partnerships, an essential point of a modern university. By the way, I've used the term modern university already a few times. If you want to discover the definition, what we mean about that, what we mean with that, I refer to the paper, and it is also summarized here on this slide. So as important processes, I think there are the anchoring with companies, non-profit sector, government bodies, platforms, clusters, and other multiple stakeholders. The cross-fertilization, research, innovation, education, training, and outreach, anchoring strategy for Europe and worldwide, international, national, and regional anchorage. Still another type of processes that is important is the recruitment and employment of the graduates. I'm very close now to the end of my talk. In summary, we have a descriptive narrative of university governance of 10 cases allowing bottom-up comparison. I see two alternatives to move forward. Alternative 1, is to verify how university processes transit through the organogram. If we do that, we come very close to the world of institutional accreditation processes, but also close to the identification of best practices. Alternative 2 is another direction we could go. It is the study of the link of university governance levels and properties of the leadership profiles at these levels. And then we come in support of the MOOC and its splitting into young academic leaders, middle academic leaders, and senior academic leaders. LEAD2, in LEAD2, theory meets practice, and that is very useful. As Albert Einstein said, in theory there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. And that is why the discussions in the LEAD2 community are so interesting. Thank you for your attention. See you next time. Bye-bye.